Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back after a very long hiatus to the Mailbag Showdown. This is a series I used to run a long time ago. Basically, it's a fancy way to say that I want to do some Q&A. I went and I got a new logo and other things, but what I didn't do before trying to film this was go and actually ask for some questions. But thankfully, I don't necessarily need to, because all I need to do is check on comments of my recent videos, and plenty of people just ask me questions anyway, so we're going to go ahead with that. But today, specifically, I want to focus on one particular question that has come up a lot in the last couple of weeks. What is going on in the situation between Sony and Crunchyroll? So a couple of weeks ago, it was announced that there was a deal potentially going in place between Sony and Crunchyroll's owner, AT&T, in that Sony might potentially be buying Crunchyroll. Now, I do want to state kind of up front that I'm not an expert in these sorts of things. Even if I was an expert, there is plenty about the situation that is not made public, and also nothing has been set in stone yet. The sale hasn't necessarily gone through. There is no 100% guarantee that it will. All I wanted to talk about today is basically what this could mean for us as consumers in the future. A lot of what we want to talk about is how this will affect anime streaming. Because right now, I'm going to be speaking from an American perspective, even though some of this doesn't apply to me directly because I'm in Canada. But from American perspective, you have a couple of places where you can stream anime legally. You have Crunchyroll, you have Funimation, you have HIDIVE, you have Netflix, and I think technically Amazon, but Amazon hasn't actually grabbed the new shows recently anyway. A lot of the major licenses that have come in the last few seasons have been Crunchyroll, Funimation, and Netflix. HIDIVE usually ends up picking up a couple of things, but a lot of what HIDIVE has been specializing in the last couple of years is older licenses, not necessarily things that are brand spanking new. Last season, for example, HIDIVE was able to pick up the final season of Snafu, but that kind of makes sense since their major partner, Sentai Filmworks, owns the rights to the previous seasons of Snafu, so there were probably agreements already in place, or at least things that were very easy to negotiate. But HIDIVE is still very important, specifically because this might be very good for them. So Crunchyroll moving from AT&T, who has really no other streaming services attached to them, over to Sony, who already owns Funimation, is kind of a big deal. Very broadly, this could see a return of what we saw a number of years ago, the partnership between Crunchyroll and Funimation. Now, that partnership occurred just before Sony bought Funimation, and that's why it only lasted for so long, because it became a point where you had two major competing streaming services actually have to compete against one another again. But now, if Sony ends up owning Crunchyroll, things are a little bit different. The roles between the two companies are going to have to massively change, because it doesn't make sense to have both of them competing against one another when they're both owned by the same parent company. There is a good chance that at that point, both companies are going to end up being downsized so that they focus specifically on what they're really good at. Funimation largely is great for dubbing, simulcasting, and also home video releases, while Crunchyroll has the far better, personal opinion, far better streaming service. I do have to apologize because I feel like my voice is going. It was perfectly fine before I set up trying to talk today. But you know, if my voice goes, whoops, that's not good actually. So they'll get downsized. They'll start focusing on what they are good at. But this changes things up a little bit dramatically. Because now, instead of having 4 streaming services that are kind of competing with one another, 2 of them are going to be more or less combined, and then you're going to have Netflix and HIDIVE. Now, this will put HIDIVE in a very interesting position, because right now, down in the States, they are part of a partnership with Crunchyroll and Verve, in that all of the shows on HIDIVE are available to Verve users. So if you're on Verve, you get Crunchyroll and you get HIDIVE for one monthly price. It's kind of this connection thing. Now, the other interesting problem with businessing, and the report saying that Crunchyroll is being bought out, it does not necessarily specify whether that means Verve. Because really, if you go down the list of what owns what, AT&T owns Otter Media, which owns Elation, which owns Crunchyroll. Now, in my experience, Elation has very much just been a stand-in for Crunchyroll. Kind of how, like, everybody refers to Google as the main corporation, even though it's technically owned by Alphabet. But from a business standpoint, it is a very big question on whether or not this purchase means that Verve is going with, or if Verve is just going to be dissolved and something new is going to be made up from that. Ideally, from a consumer's perspective, we would love to have HIDIVE still be connected to Verve, or whatever future name that service ends up becoming. Because then, if you're wanting to watch anime streaming, you only need one thing in the US plus Netflix. Because if there is one service like Verve that has Funimation, that has Crunchyroll, that has HIDIVE, you got basically everything. And for us, that would be stupidly amazing. But there's no guarantee that that will actually happen. It really depends on how beneficial the partnership with Verve has been for HIDIVE. If it's been really, really good for them, they'll probably want to continue it. If it hasn't, well, this is probably going to be a pretty good excuse for them to cut ties. And why would they want to cut ties? Well, because when it comes to actually licensing anime, the whole game has changed. Okay, so Sony is Japanese. It's based in Japan, always has been, big Japanese corporation. Now, while it is historically true that Japanese companies, so anime licensors, for example, like the anime producers and so forth, they like dealing with Japanese people and Japanese businesses more so than they like dealing with Americans. While that is true, business is business is business. And if for whatever reason you have anime producers that don't like Sony, that don't want to deal with Aniplex, which is owned by Sony, this is where HIDIVE could potentially score a lot of points. If for whatever reason you have an anime that's not big enough for Netflix to care, and the producers don't necessarily like Sony and Aniplex, HIDIVE suddenly becomes a very good option for them. HIDIVE then becomes positioned to be a, hey, you don't want to deal with Netflix, but you also really don't want to deal with Sony, come to us because we're the only ones left. Now that is me making like very large assumptions as to how popular Sony and Aniplex is over in Japan, when honestly I have zero idea. But I'm just laying out possibilities. Everything here today is just speculation. Large speculation. Because certain things we already know aren't going to change. Netflix isn't going to give a care. Netflix has already gone on and been like, hey, look at all these great anime studios that we're going to be making stuff with. I didn't really see a point in that announcement personally. I would have liked it a lot better if they just, waited. Netflix seems to be like treating anime announcements similar to like how Microsoft has been talking about like their brand new slate of picking up new gaming studios. They're not advertising what games are being worked on. They're just like, hey, we're working with these studios on stuff. Be excited. So Netflix is working with a variety of companies, an impressive repertoire of companies to be fair, but they haven't said jack about what they're actually working on, so I refuse to be excited until that point. I think that's fair. That's pretty fair. Why be excited over literally nothing right now? Which then, I guess, begs the question of should we be excited about this potential merger? I want to say yes, because here's the thing. In my eyes, when it comes to, like, streaming services, as much as I don't generally speaking like monopolies, I think that monopolies have a lot of dangers to them. I also feel like when it comes to anime streaming, having a lot of things in one place makes sense. If you have all of the major anime that is coming out in any given season on one streaming service, it is very easy to justify the legal payment in that case. The hardest thing to do is to have all of the major shows spread out among like 4 different services, and you have to pick and choose or just pirate. And that's not a choice that I think people should be making. I do like the idea of everything being on 1, perhaps 2 streaming services. If all I had to do in Canada was pay for 2 streaming services to get all of the anime I need, which was Verve or what have you, and Netflix, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Currently, because I'm paying for all of them because, it's my job. I'm currently paying for all of them, but I would love for that monthly fee to go down. I'd love to not have to pay for 5 streaming services a month. And I totally understand that there are many people out there who can't. Like, what are they gonna do? So in that regard, I can see this as a positive. Really, though, we need to wait until details come out, because all it is at the moment that we have is, hey, Crunchyroll and Sony, maybe, also almost $1 billion. The announcement felt very much like bragging rights for whatever investors are gonna be making a shit ton of money off of this deal. I could be wrong. But what are the potential downsides to this? Well, when you have one company that owns everything, problems can happen. When you don't have competition, things can change and not necessarily in a good way. I have spoken that out of the streaming services that exist, I really do like Crunchyroll and their platform, but I'm not stupid enough to say that it is a perfect platform. Crunchyroll as a streaming service has a lot of problems, though far less than something like Funimation. However, If they're not incentivized to innovate, that can be a major problem, because then we come down to a thing of where they are reliant on the knowledge that you have to go to them in order to have basically all of the major good anime. And so they'll just be like, well, we don't need to pay to, as long as it just works, right? The money will come in. And they're right. It would. Having a monopoly does that. It doesn't force them to innovate. It doesn't force them to improve their product at all. Because really, in their mind, the product is the anime itself. And as long as they can get that to you, everything should be fine. Even if the method in which they give it to you is clumsy and could be drastically improved. Though, as a counter to that, it's not like the conflict between all of the major anime streamers at the moment has led to a lot of innovation. Like, Funimation has only just recently started to do some changes to their website. It's baby steps, but it's not the horrible mess it was a couple of months ago. And, you know, well, that's probably all going to get scrapped now if Funimation streaming service is just going to be ended and all of their licenses is going to be moved to something else. They are going to be very careful, though, because it's not like Funimation and Crunchyroll are going away. Their brands are too big for that. Sony would be absolutely stupid to not find a way to keep the brands alive. Brands mean a lot, and the name recognition of Funimation. Funimation has been around for a very long time, and Crunchyroll has become such a juggernaut recently that to get rid of either of them, to get rid of that, like, free cultural knowledge is just stupid talk. So they're gonna keep the brands. What I think is far more likely is that the streaming services themselves might close down, and they'll take something like Verve, quote, quote, or some other new branding that they'll come up with to signify the union of this partnership or this group, or however they're gonna spin it in the end. They're gonna take this new brand, and it's gonna have all the other brands under it, so then Funimation can keep their branding, and Crunchyroll can keep their branding, and they're still gonna do their own thing, but it'll all be combined under one roof with a different name. That's how I probably see this going. What I really hope as a Canadian, though, as I wrap this up, is that whatever brand that is, whatever new house that is, that we actually get it. Verve is not available in Canada, and it hasn't. Why? From my understanding, the reason why Verve isn't available in Canada is because there are certain things that are on Verve that they don't have international rights to. They only have the rights to the US to, and for whatever reason, they never wanted to program things so that they would just, you know, block off the content that they're not allowed to share in Canada with Canadians, and instead they're just like, no, you just don't get the whole service. You need to be forced to innovate. And I'm worried that they're not. That's kind of my biggest fear with this whole scenario, is the monopoly will force them to not innovate because they won't need to. While there is the convenience that they'll all be under one roof, while there are a lot of positives to this situation, I am a pessimist by nature. And I am worried about how this might go and how this might turn out. But, you know, we'll have to see. Next time on Mailbag Showdown, we're going to be going through the questions that you have submitted, not only here on this video, so by the by, go post your questions, but also ones that pop up quite frequently in other videos of mine. So if you would like to be featured in the next Mailbag Showdown, please post your interesting questions down below. I'm not entirely sure how often we're going to be doing this, but I hope to have it at least once, maybe twice a month. We're going to see how it goes. We're kind of busy prepping for the review week of Awesome for next month, so we're going to see how that turns out. But, you know, we're going to try and push through with this, because this is something that I've really wanted to be coming back to. I really want to engage more with you people. So if you've had a burning question and you'd like to be featured in the video, you now have an option for you. Of course, if you have one that you wanted a little bit more of a detailed answer to, if you happen to support us via our Patreon campaign, you'll get access to the Patreon-specific Discord, of which there is a channel called Ask Arcada. You can ping me there, and I will hopefully within a day or so be able to get back to you and have, like, more of an interesting discussion. We've had a number of good discussions come out of questions in that channel, so that'll be very interesting if you'd like to join us over there. So until next time, watch more anime and stay frosty.